And all right, hi everyone. As you're coming in, we're going to ask you to please mute yourselves. If you would like to turn your cameras on, free. We'd love to see your beautiful faces, but it is not at all required. Yeah, and we'll get started soon once everyone is here. All right, I think we're going to give it until 05 and then we'll get started. All right, it looks like it's 5:05. I think we're gonna get going. So I'm just gonna repeat what I said earlier before we start. Please stay muted unless you have a question. If you have a question. Am I good now? Can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. Yeah, stay muted generally for the panel. However, if you have questions, feel free to unmute and raise your hand to ask that question. That's fine. Or you can put the question in the chat. And again, if you feel comfortable, turn your cameras on. It really helps us to see faces that we're talking to. but no pressure at all. Yeah, so if you would like to turn your cameras on, feel free. And with that, let's get started. Okay, so if you are here for the test prep panel, you are in the right place. Lovely to have you. We have some wonderful panelists with us here today. So my name is Fatma Semak. I will be moderating the panel today. I am Group 21 of CPISP. I go to Cornell University and I am majoring in operations research and government.
Hi, my name's Iyad. I go to the University of Pennsylvania. I study computer science and computer graphics. I graduated in 2017 from Al Hidayah School here in Bahrain.
Hi, my name is Sarah Mohammed. I am a Group 20 CPISP student, and I graduated from Harak Secondary Girls School in Bahrain, then went to Oakham School, which was a boarding school in the UK, and from there, I'm currently a dentistry student in the University of Liverpool, and I just finished my first year.
Hi everyone, I'm Yusuf Al-Najjar. I'm Group 23. My first 2 years of high school were at St. Chris here in Bahrain, and then my last 2 years were at boarding school in the UK. I'm going to be starting computer science at Carnegie Mellon in the fall.
All right. So before we get started with actual panel things, we wanted to play a little bit of a game. And we thought this was something you guys would enjoy. So coming up, we're going to have a series of tweets, and you're going to see the tweet, but not the person who tweeted it. And what we would like for you guys to do is guess who tweeted, that tweet. You can put it in chat. If you are absolutely certain that you know exactly who it is, feel free to unmute and yell it out. That's okay as well. But yeah, we just have fun with it and guess crazy guesses, and it doesn't have to be right, it just has to be fun. So with that, here is our first tweet. All right, we have Kanye, we have Elon Musk. When the correct answer is given, I will let you know that you have guessed the right one. So it is not, it's Martha Stewart. Great job, Mustafa, you got it. Yeah, so that was Martha Stewart. Guys,
Although I will say it is a very Elon kind of tweet. I do agree.
yeah, you guys were pretty close. Okay, here's our next one. Last night I had cereal with milk for the first time and it was life-changing. And yeah, it was Kylie Jenner. Thank you, Mariam and Hamid Hussein. I think you guys both got it at the same time. It was Kylie Jenner, everyone's favorite tweeter. Okay, here's our next one. If chickens could say, love me, that would be awesome. All right, Justin Bieber, Taha Fadl, and Hamad Abdul Karim, and everyone's getting it. You guys are awesome. So yeah, that one was, in fact, Justin Bieber. I really hope you guys aren't, putting these into Google. But if you are, that's fine. It's just about having fun and laughing at celebrities, so it's okay. Okay, thanks, guys. I had no idea pickle was really a cucumber. You guys totally confirmed it. And Taha, again, Kim Kardashian, you are on a roll. Okay, ceiling is simply a floor from below. Yes, all my Elon lovers. Here you go. Obviously, we had to have an Elon tweet in here. We just had to, wait for the right time. It would be too easy if we put it first. Okay. And finally, our last tweet of the day. I hate when I'm on a flight and I wake up with a water bottle next to me. Like, oh, great, now I got to be responsible for this water bottle. And we have a lot of Kanye in chat. That is correct. And the work that we had to go through to dig up this tweet, because that man likes to delete his Twitter and his tweets, every 5 minutes. But we got it. And I'm glad that you guys knew who it was. Okay. So now we're going to actually talk about, the exam. We want to start with test format. So actually, before we talk about test format, I wanted to let you guys know what the format of this panel is going to be. So I will be asking questions and our lovely panelists will be, answering them throughout, giving you guys advice and answers to the questions. If you have any other questions at all throughout the panel, please, just drop them in chat, or you can private message me or any of the panelists, or you can put it in, the public chat. Anything is okay. Or if you would like to just unmute yourself and ask the question, that's fine as well. All right. So to my lovely panelists, how familiar were you guys with the IELTS and SAT and their format before you started the program? And how did you familiarize yourself with that format as a result?
I didn't know anything about the IELTS or the SAT. I just only heard of them going into CPISP. What I ended up doing is just looking over a lot of practice questions and past tests to sort of understand the format. And there are also documents for the College Board and the British Council that help you understand what the format is like and how long each section takes. But overall, the best thing you could do is just find test models and just solve those questions, and that kind of familiarizes you with the test format.
Yeah, so my experience was quite similar to Iyad's, because I was in a public school, so SAT wasn't really familiar test to us, but IELTS was a little bit more of a familiar test, because some universities in Bahrain started kind of requesting it or preferring it in the application right now. IELTS was also a little more similar to the English tests that we used to have in school. So like, just to run over the format, which I'm pretty sure all of you know by now, the IELTS has 4 sections. That is reading, which has some passages that you can that you have to answer questions about after. The listening, and the difference between that and the listening in public schools was that the questions are slightly trickier, but not by much. But the main difference is that they only run it once. The audio tape, they only run it once. And then the writing, which requires you to write 2 different passages. And then the new part, which is the speaking, which is more of a conversation kind of part that you have later. We're going to be discussing all of these in details and like tips and tricks on how to revise it or help yourself like kind of learn each of these parts later on. The SAT is more of an English and a maths test. So you have 2 English parts, reading and writing, and then you have 2 math parts, which is one that requires a calculator and one that doesn't require a calculator. So for us, I think most of us, at least public school kids, the IELTS was more of a familiar test than the SAT. But we kind of managed to familiarize ourselves with it through the program and then through our outside research later as well. Fatma, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. So let's get into the IELTS a little bit now, like more specifically. What section did each of you guys find to be the most challenging, and as a result, how did you prepare for it?
I think that the writing was the most challenging section for me. It's takes the most time to, it took me the most time to study for, and the way I did it was just by doing past paper questions over and over and just making sure to stick to the format for each question type, using the keywords, going back to the rubric and making sure I was hitting each of the points on there.
Yeah, I'd agree. The writing test was probably the most difficult part of the IELTS for me. I think part of what makes it difficult is it's difficult to measure how well you're doing while you're doing the practice. Whereas if you're doing reading, you just check the answer guide and you will know whether or not you're right. What you could do to combat that is try reading through rubrics or online tips, videos on YouTube that explain what to focus on in the writing test and what you should do / not do during the test.
Yeah, so it's for me, it wasn't much about obviously it was much about the writing, but the things that I found that I was losing marks or grades on were all the technical stuff. So things like not answering the question to the fullest, or not organizing my writing as best as I can, like the paragraphing and what's on, and things like little things like let's say introducing new ideas in the conclusion, which you should never which you should never do. Things like that, when you kind of go over them and practice doing them, they can really help you retain some of the marks that you can lose easily.
All right, so my answer to this question is a little bit different. So everyone has spoken to at great length about the writing section. For me, I guess the section that was most challenging, I was most anxious about, was the speaking, which I know sounds a little bit ridiculous, because I had been speaking English my whole life, but what was scary to me was kind of the concept of sitting and being graded, and about like speaking and not knowing, how they were gonna, what kind of questions they were gonna ask me and how I was going to, basically what they were going to evaluate exactly. I was also worried about having a British accent, which I did not have. And I don't think I ever will, but the good news is that's not really a concern. Basically, once I started thinking about the speaking section as more of a conversation, it was a lot easier for me to, adjust to it. Like I would just call my mom on the phone and talk to her for a little bit about something random, it might be taxes, it might be chocolate, it might be, whatever, as long as you're just talking smoothly throughout that conversation. That's really what matters. They don't care if you have a British accent, they don't care if you have an American accent, as long as they know what the words you're saying are. So that was really comforting to me once I started thinking of it in that way. All right. So I spoke a little bit about my practice for the speaking section, but what about the rest of our panelists? How did you guys practice for speaking?
The number one thing you want to do is familiarize yourself with the sort of format, because they do follow a specific formula in terms of what kind of questions they ask you and in what order and how. So just make sure you know all that type of stuff and come prepared for it. And then I guess the other thing is you could practice with someone else. Yeah.
For me, I use my mirror a lot. Like speaking into the mirror, I think helps you identify mistakes more easily than if you're just saying it into your wall or something. Or you could also record yourself. I hate the sound of my voice, so I didn't like doing that much. But if you're okay with the sound of your voice, then that's a really good way of noticing mistakes.
And as long as you don't repeat what you're saying a lot, and as long as you speak smoothly, no matter what accent you have, as long as what you're saying is clear and smooth, and your vocabulary is good and varied, you don't really need to push yourself and put that much stress on yourself further, because the more stressed you are for speaking, the more likely it is for you to stutter and not be able to like communicate as easily.
All right, thank you guys. We have a question from the chat. How many hours did you guys spend studying per day? Or like kind of like a study schedule, and any advice on making a study schedule?
Okay, so I don't think it was much about the hours. It was rather about how we used the time that we had. So I wouldn't say I put more than 2 hours a day to study for the IELTS exam, and that was closer to the test as well. I had days where I didn't study at all. I had days where I studied a little bit more, but it was, for me, it was like when I was studying, I made sure to study with the timer on. So I can put myself under that timing pressure and know that I am able to finish the task on time. I also made sure that I practiced every single kind of type of question that I might face in the IELTS exam, especially for like writing and the writing tasks. So let's say for task 1, you're supposed to be describing a graph or an illustration, let's say. So I made sure that I described all types of graphs, or practiced at least describing all types of graphs and maps and so on, like anything that can kind of be there in the exam. So when the exam comes, I'm not too surprised by anything.
I think Nasser said it right in chat. It's quality over quantity. It doesn't matter how much time you're spending. You can do 4 hours of useless revision, or do 1 hour of really strong revision that will prepare you so much better than those 4 hours.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Our next question, do you have any advice for the listening and reading sections? I know we talked a lot about writing and speaking, but those sections also matter as well. So any advice on those sections?
So the first thing I'd say about the listening and reading sections is they're not particularly hard. They just require you to be focused and require you to get everything done on time. So for the reading section, just make sure you're efficient, skim through the text you have, and then don't read it in detail. Don't try to understand every single detail there. Just skim it, make sure you understand where everything is, and then go to the questions and go find the answer and put it there. Every answer in the reading section is going to be from the text. Also, make sure you actually properly read the questions. The IELTS is very strict about answering all parts of the question. Make sure that you answer everything that the question is asking of you. And then with the listening, just make sure you keep focused for the entire time. For public school students, it's kind of like your midterms and finals in English, the listening test, except it's quite a bit harder, and they don't repeat it multiple times. You just get to hear it once, and that's it. So make sure you're focused, and make sure you read the questions before you go into the listening test, so that you have the question in mind as you listen to the text.
There's also that in the listening part, the questions are in order. So they're not going to be talking about, or they're not going to be answering question 3 before question 2, let's say. So just make sure that you're kind of following through the answers, and you're not going to be having that pressure on you to jump between questions. So just relax and kind of try and listen for the answer for each question as it goes, because it is going to be spoken in order. It is a little bit similar to the reading in the reading part as well. So in the reading part, when you're reading a passage, the questions are kind of also can be answered in order. So you're not going to be answering a question that is specifically about, let's say, paragraph 5 before a question that is specifically about paragraph 2. And that kind of lifts the pressure off your shoulders for like reading really thoroughly, like reading the whole passage really thoroughly before going to the questions, because that can really waste your time.
One other thing to note as well with the reading and listening sections is that the questions where they ask you, there's a not listed option. for some of them, or it's like true, false, not mentioned, something like that. Those questions generally, I know it seems a bit counterintuitive, but they don't want you to infer or assume anything. They want you to just say exactly what, the text has told you. So if you can, if you think about it, they kind of said that, then the answer is more likely going to be not mentioned. They're never going to ask you to assume or infer or think about anything that is not directly being stated in the text. If that's what they want you to do, they would have said assume or infer. But since they don't use that language, usually that means your answer to that question is going to be based only on what is in the text itself.
Yeah, speaking of true or false, if you get a question that tells you write true or false, you don't write T or F, you don't write yes or no, you write true or false, that's it. They will take points off if you do anything other than true or false.
And make sure you know the difference between true or false type questions and yes and no type questions, because there is a small difference in the way you're supposed to interpret the question, and it can make a difference between a not given and a yes or a no.
So basically, like Iyad said, overall throughout the entire section, it's not so much the difficulty of the questions and the text itself, but they like to, get you with small things that as long as you pay attention, you should be able to, hopefully you don't lose points over silly things that you know. So I did want to go back to the writing section a little bit. We had mentioned the writing rubric, and for anyone who hasn't seen the writing rubric before, and I know that I hadn't really looked at a rubric properly at the beginning when I was studying, what is it and what does it mean and how do you use it to, improve your score on the writing section?
So a rubric is essentially a massive table with, just like that one, with all the bands on the side. And basically what you need to do in each category to achieve that band. The rubric is quite perceptive, because it is really up to the person who's marking you to kind of decide your mark. Obviously, like with the help of what they're seeing in like how you wrote and what you wrote. But there are things that you will have in hand, and you can use the rubric for it to kind of raise your band, especially in writing. So let's say things like task achievement, like that specific kind of section or category, that is something that is completely within your hands to raise. So always aim for a 9 in things that you can kind of control. So let's say task achievement, you can easily get a band 9 in this category if you fully answer the question, and if you kind of like let's say put your answer in a right way, and paragraph and kind of sort your answer in a right way. And that kind of allows you to get an easy 9 in that section, or an 8 if they kind of think that you could have put it differently or better. But that is quite a high band to start with, and that kind of gives you more leniency towards kind of having a slightly lower score in grammar or lexical resources.
All right, thank you for that very detailed explanation, Sara. So we have a question in chat about, band score and improving your score, and so basically if you have any advice, A, for improving your score, and B, for like what differentiates the scores and how you can start to move up, because once you hit that 6 or 7 point, it's usually very hard to differentiate between that and an 8 or a 9. So what advice do you have for moving up in bands?
Looking at the question in particular, they talked about their mock tests, which is a really good idea to be taking mock exams, but it's what you do after the mock exams that's more important than actually sitting the test. You want to go back, look at your answers that were wrong, and try and understand why they were wrong, and try and get in the mindset of this is how I'm supposed to answer this question.
Yeah, if you can go back after reading the test and yeah, like Yusuf said, get yourself in the mentality, try to understand what they're asking for, because usually with these kinds of tests, they want you to think in a particular way. If you can find a way to get yourself into that mentality, that would be great. Other than that, go back, and if you can pinpoint what it is you're doing or you're not quite doing right, it would be great. Otherwise, I'd suggest, I mean, there are probably a lot of online tips about the IELTS, how to score higher and stuff like that. Usually they contain a lot of useful information. Some things you might not have paid attention to, or some things that we might have missed. You could probably find online tips for.
It's essentially just practicing. Just like they said, if you can pinpoint where exactly or what type of questions exactly that you're kind of messing up every time, or what, like which section which section do you need to like kind of focus on more, then just go on and practice that bit more and more. But overall, just keep practicing, because I don't think there's anything else to do other than practicing. Kind of focus on like little tweaks. IELTS is not a test that you can kind of study content for. It's not like chemistry or maths that you need to learn concepts for, but it's more of a kind of a practice test, or like practicing or like your general English skills.
Okay, thank you guys so much for that. My next question is about what you guys specifically what you use to prepare for the IELTS. You know, what resources, what books, what YouTube links were you using to prepare for the exam?
Okay, so one of the things that I used to prepare for the IELTS was when the scholarship signs you up for the IELTS, like when they finalize your test dates with the British Council, the British Council is going to send you an email, and that email is going to have some links of their own, and that has so many IELTS content that you can go over, and so many links and websites that you can have mock like papers on, and there are ones that even like specifically focus on each section. They can be really helpful.
All right. Wait, yeah, okay. So Yusuf, sorry, there we go. We're putting a link in the chat that has a lot of the resources that Sada just mentioned that we've used. You know, it's general for the SAT and for the IELTS, but it has those links that Sada mentioned. The books that we used, I know I used the Barron's book, which I thought was super helpful way back when it was on paper, and it was super helpful in just kind of giving me I think 5 full practice exams, which was awesome. It also had a CD and also a QR code, because I know we don't really use CDs anymore. It had a CD and a QR code for the listening as well, which I thought was super helpful. I'm getting a question about when we took the IELTS. So we are aware that you guys are kind of in limbo right now and don't know when your IELTS is going to be. And I'm very sorry for that. And I wish we knew when your IELTS was. But for us, at least my year, it was July. So it's definitely not going to be in July for you guys if you don't know when it is yet. But I know for me, it was like mid to late July. I don't know about the rest of you guys. Maybe Yusuf, your answer is closer to what's going to happen this year.
Yeah, well, for us, we actually started, our first test date was late July, and then the second test dates were at the start of August. So I'm sure you'll be getting information soon. Since it's late July now, you can probably assume it's going to be early to mid-August. But just be careful with that. It's not it's just me guessing.
Just one more little tip, because your exam is going to be the computer-based exam, especially for people who don't really type much, you're gonna need that kind of typing speed when you're doing your writing exam on the computer. So what I would propose is that when you're doing your practice writing section, just try and practice it on like a blank Word document, or just type it somewhere and use a keyboard, because that's going to give you more of a feel of like how it's going to be on the test day, rather than using like just writing it with a pen. You're going to be developing two skills at once.
All right. Thank you so much, Sada. We're going to take a brief break right now before moving into the SAT section, because I have some announcements that I need to make. I'm sorry, this is housekeeping, but also a bit of a brain break for you all. Oh, actually, before we move on. Okay, is your IELTS going to be computer-based? We don't know for sure, but we think so. And again, we don't have that kind of information. Oh, okay. I would trust the answers of everyone in, yes, trust everyone in the program more, because we don't actually have this information. So yeah, if the IELTS is going to be computer-based or not, I would trust the answers of everyone else who's with you in the program, because they would know better than we would. Do we have any other questions that are specific to the IELTS? I don't want to move on before we answer those. Going once, going twice. Okay, I am going to make the few announcements that I have now. And if you have any questions after, is it risky to study only one day before? Absolutely, do not do that. This exam is not made for you to take the day before. Basically, the way that they designed this exam, you have to know the format well, and you have to have been practicing with it the entire time for you to be able to do well. Because it's really not so much about the content and more about how they get you on little things and how they have a particular vision in their mind for how you need to be answering the questions. Okay, with that, you know, if we will do the UKV IELTS or the regular IELTS, I think someone else would know better than me.
I'm not
which
100% sure. I think it was the regular IELTS, but I'm not 100% sure. It's kind of been a while.
Yeah, so for my year, we did the normal IELTS, and then when we went on to go to the UK later on, when we were chosen for the scholarship, we then had to do the UKVI. But I think generally you would just do the normal one.
Also, there's the academic and general training test types. It will be the academic one, yeah, as Ahmed said in chat just now.
Yeah, so just a little bit of context for any of you that are interested in studying in the US, the academic IELTS in some colleges can be used as evidence of English language proficiency, kind of like the TOEFL. You could, some colleges will accept the academic IELTS, which is part of why they want you to do it, but no one will accept the other version of the IELTS, the professional IELTS at US schools as well. So they give you the academic regular IELTS in order for you to have options. You know, if you're, regardless of whether you're going to the US or the UK, you're still able to use that exam. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make those quick announcements, and we can continue talking about the IELTS if you guys need it. So this is now not SAT and IELTS panel, Fatma. This is me speaking to you guys as an organizer of the mentoring program. We hope you guys have been enjoying your one-on-ones. If they haven't been scheduled, please reach out to one of the organizers and let us know, you know, if a particular mentor hasn't reached out to you to schedule a meeting. we'd be more than happy to figure out what's going on with that and get you guys set up if possible. And you guys have that little feedback form that was sent in the email. Please make sure that you're filling that out during the one-on-one, not during the one-on-one, but after it's over. It's just really super helpful for us to know, you know, how the meetings are going and making sure that they're working. And if they're not working, you know, how we can improve them in the future for you guys and for future years. The college applications panel, or rather it's more of a workshop, is going to be next week. Updates on that are coming soon. Stay tuned, but it's really hopefully going to be an awesome resource for you guys to apply to colleges. And there's also University and Majors Fair coming up, and you should be getting information about that soon. We are currently working behind the scenes to get you some amazing scholars that we have who have great experiences in their majors and in their universities, who are going to hopefully give you more information on their specific fields and their specific schools, so that you are able to make better decisions about your future. All right. Are we ready to move into the SAT section? If we're not, if anyone has any questions about the IELTS, one last time, before we move on to the SAT, now would be the time to ask. Okay, a logistical question. When are we going to be done? Hopefully we will be done by 6:30, 6:30 to 7. I hope we don't go to 7 o'clock, but you know, that's going to be our time range. Okay, so let's talk about the SAT. So what section did each of you guys find the most challenging in the SAT, and how did you prepare for it?
Yeah, I found the SAT reading section quite difficult, actually. As a public school student, I wasn't really used to the density of the SAT text. Compared to the IELTS, I think they're a lot denser, a lot more vocabulary heavy. So I struggled with that quite a bit. And also, so yeah, I had to understand the texts, and then I had to go back and answer the questions. So yeah, what I ended up doing essentially was there are a lot of books that explain to you strategies in dealing with the reading section, and also explain to you how you're expected to answer the questions. Yeah, at the end, what I did was essentially I'd skim the entire text, not necessarily understanding everything about it, but I'd understand where everything is, similar to what I did in the IELTS. And then after every question, I'd go back, try to figure it out. If it was spending too much time, I'd move on to the next one, because as you know, I have a very limited amount of time in the SAT.
I actually found the math section to be harder. When I was doing my first few practice tests, I was doing a lot worse on my math section. So I started looking at the questions more and realized that the maths was actually really easy. It's just not the kind of maths I was used to. Like the British education system didn't teach math in the style of the SAT questions, but they did teach the maths you need. So it's really kind of adapting your existing knowledge to the SAT questions for math.
So the fun thing about the SAT is no one teaches math the way it is expected to in the SAT. Kind of you should, hopefully everyone should know the math content, but they never really, no one who is normal teaches math, you know, where they're trying to trick you, right? But that's kind of how the SAT is. So yeah, don't worry about not knowing the content of the math section. Hopefully you should be fine in that aspect, but you know, Yusuf is not alone in him not being familiar with the SAT format of the math questions. That is how they are designed. So do not feel discouraged when you look at it and you're a little bit overwhelmed by how it looks and how they're asking you to do certain things. It's just kind of how the exam is. I wanted to add on a little bit to what Iyad was saying about the reading section. So it was, at first I was focusing on everything else in the exam because like reading, easy. It's just text and you answer the questions. And then as it started getting closer to exam day.
I understand.
Oh my God, I am so sorry about that. Yeah, as it gets closer to exam day, I started struggling the most with the reading section. And I was taking way too much time reading the texts, and I was, not having enough time to finish the entire English section. It was very upsetting for me because I was like, I've been preparing this entire time and suddenly I'm struggling with reading and having enough time. And I learned a trick that kind of really helped me get much further with the reading section, which is read the first paragraph in the text, skim the middle paragraphs, maybe read the first and last sentence of each paragraph, but don't read more than that, and then read the concluding paragraph, and then go ahead and answer the questions. It's so much of a time saver because I promise you that you do not need to read that text through twice in order to answer the questions effectively. Almost every question, just like the IELTS, is going to point you to a specific part in the passage, and at that point you can go ahead and read the passage and get the answer that you need. You don't have to read anything twice in order to answer the question. And by the time you get to the questions that ask about, generally about the whole passage, you will have at that point read everything that you need to know to answer the question. So the first time that you're looking at a passage, just skim it, read the intro and the conclusion, because those are usually useful information for you to have a sense of what the passage is about, and then only go back and read, the in-between when you need to for a specific question. Okay. I know we talked a little bit about the English section, but does anyone else have advice specifically for studying for the English section other than practice, practice, practice?
It is literally mainly practice, but my advice, and I think it goes for all sections, is that try, and when you actually do some practice, either a full test or even if you're practicing just one section, do it with a timer on, because it's more about that time kind of crunch rather than actually being able to answer the questions.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about the reading. Anything about the grammar section? I know we haven't touched on it much, but it is worth talking about because at the end of the day, it's about 25% of the SAT grade at the end of the day.
Well, I think it's mostly about being able to identify what goes where. It's very formulaic. Once you do enough practice questions, you'll be able to identify where the comma is supposed to be, where you're supposed to put a semicolon in, because you'll be able to tell from the clues around it in a sentence.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Yusuf said. We have a question in chat back to the reading section for a second. Should you read the questions first, then the passage? No, it doesn't really add much to your experience by reading the questions first. You'd gain a lot more by skimming the text first and then reading the questions. Because when you look at the questions and you haven't seen the passage yet, you don't really know what the questions are asking about. And it can be a little bit misleading to read the questions first. So only read the questions after you've skimmed the text one time.
Yeah, just to add on to that, if you read the questions, you're not going to have any context to them, just like Fatma said. And then you're going to go and skim the text, and then you're going to go and read the questions again because you don't remember them anymore. Yeah, essentially.
And like we've been saying, time really is a crunch. So you don't want to do anything that isn't going to add to, your ability to answer the questions. You really don't want to be wasting time on the SAT. Okay. What about the math section? Do the reading questions come in sequence? Yes. And that is what is so wonderful about the reading section. They come in sequence. Even with the comparison text, so sometimes you'll get a passage that is, is actually two separate passages, the questions for that kind of section are going to be first all about the first passage, and then all about the second passage. And then once you have gone through all of that, then they ask questions about the two together. So even in that context, you should be able to answer the questions in sequence without any worries at all.
They can also ask some questions that are generalized about the whole passage. Like they start with a question or two that is about the whole passage, and then they go on with the questions that are in sequence. I normally found it easier to kind of leave those for a bit and go through all the like specific questions first. And then when I'm done, I would go back to like answer these generalized questions, because by then I would have gone through the whole passage just to answer all the specific questions.
Does anyone else have any other questions about the English section? I don't want to move to the math section before we answer everything that you guys want to know about English. Okay, for now, that's okay. If any questions come up in the meantime, that's okay. You can still include them in chat or raise your hand to ask the question as usual. Okay, so how do you practice for the math section? I know we touched on it briefly, but in more depth, how do you practice for the math section?
Okay, essentially, most of you probably have covered most, if not all, of the math concepts that the SAT tackles. You could probably find a list of those topics on the College Board website. Yeah, it'll tell you exactly what the topics that are tackled are. So just make sure you revise those topics and make sure you understand how those topics work. And then do practice questions to understand how the questions usually come, what they're usually asking, and the format in general. For public school students, most of you, it's the same thing. Most of you have covered all these mathematical concepts before. It's just you've covered them in Arabic. So essentially, what you'd have to do is familiarize yourself with the terminology in English. What I used to do is two things. I used to go through the textbooks I had, and for most of the terms that are introduced, you're going to find their translation in English. What I also used to do is whenever I didn't understand anything from class, I used to just go to Khan Academy and watch the video on the topic, which is in English, and then I'd understand it. I'd both understand it and understand it in English. So, you know, two birds, one stone.
Even if you don't have that background of previously researching it in English, which honestly it is an advantage kind of, but you can still catch up really easily. There aren't many it's not a lot of terminology that is used in maths, and you would normally find them being repeated again and again in the questions as you go. So you basically only need to learn it once, and you only need to learn a handful to kind of be able to navigate through an exam paper or an SAT paper. So you might find the first 2 or 3, let's say, a little challenging vocabulary wise. And just as you go, try and kind of translate it, understand it, and maybe have a list on the side to kind of write all the new terminology that you kind of struggled with all the translations. And then you can easily go over these a couple of times. And I'm pretty sure by like the repetitive practice of the test itself, you're going to become very familiar with the terminology by the end of it.
To add on to what Iyad said towards the start about the topics, there's a good list of the topics available on the Khan Academy practice website, which we've linked. Just in general, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but the Khan Academy website is really good for both English and math practice, because it gives you the practice tests, it gives you lessons on specific topics. So if you have a topic that you're unsure about, you can look at that one and focus on it specifically.
Yeah, and like Yusuf said, it's really, really helpful. It also identifies your weakness points and your weakness kind of topics, and the things that I need to work more about when you take the first practice test and as you go practicing as well. And then you'll be able to find like sections that are specifically to practice like a skill or a topic for both English and maths that you need to kind of focus more on, or that you're not scoring as good in, and you'll be able to kind of bring your score up with that. It also has like some mini tutorials on like how to solve questions in these like specific topics. And they also have like different difficulties for you to experience everything that you can.
So I've just linked again the document that has all of the resources that Sara and Iyad and Yusuf are mentioning. It is the same one that I put before, but if you didn't have it there, then you have it now. Please use this. We think it's going to be super helpful for you. Ahmed in chat asked, so to get the best score, is it basically practice? Yes, that is the name of the game. Practice, practice, practice. It will get you so far. I hate to sound like a broken record, but that is what you want to do. And even as you're hitting roadblocks, because that's going to happen, you're going to practice and you're not going to see improvement sometimes, but that happens, right? So the best way to overcome those roadblocks is to do what Yusuf and Sara were mentioning, which is to go back and look specifically at those weakness points and understand, why you're making those mistakes and how you can improve on them.
I think adding on to the, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Adding on to the practice point, when you're practicing on Khan Academy and you get a question wrong, we'll give you a very detailed explanation as to why, or as to how you can solve the problem like the correct way. So make sure you read through that, understand why you were wrong, and if it's, for example, the math section, try and just redo the question with the new technique they've just given you, and then writing, just kind of try and identify why you got it wrong.
Okay, so we've mentioned some resources to study for the SAT. We talked about Khan Academy a lot. Any other resources that you guys recommend or that you guys used while you were studying?
There is a book I've used extensively by Erica Meltzer. It's the SAT reading practice book. It kind of explains the reading test, gives you strategies, and explains the mindset you need to be in to answer these kinds of questions, what kind of answers they're expecting. That book, as well as the grammar version of that book, are both linked in the document that Fatma sent.
There's also a really amazing free resource. So Khan Academy is free. We should have mentioned that. But also those same practice tests, while on Khan Academy it's online and digital, you have access to those same 8 tests on paper on the College Board website, also linked in the document. And basically you just download those, print them, and you can staple them like a book, or you can, I think there's also, you could buy those tests in book format so that it's already bound for you, or you could just print them yourself and staple them and take them like a booklet, because the exam is a little book that is folded and stapled, like when they give it to you on test day. So a very easy, free way to study for the exam. And that is what I use the most. I ultimately didn't really end up buying any books for the SAT, just using those 8 exams from the College Board. It was super helpful. There's also the question and answer service questions, I believe. Yusuf, if you want to talk about those a little bit more.
Yeah, the QAS questions are actual past papers that students have sat before. There's about 10 of them on a Google Drive link on the resources sheet. That's really good for extra practice. It will get you all the way up until test date.
Yes, adding to the Khan Academy point, you can use it not only to practice for the SAT, but also to understand the math concepts. Yeah, just bring that out there.
Yeah.
And adding on to Fatma's practice point, for when I was doing the Khan Academy practice test, what I actually did was printed out the sheet and timed myself writing it by hand, because that's how it's going to be done in the real test. And then I would start the test on Khan Academy and just fill in all my answers. So I could get their feedback, but also get the real test taking experience.
Yeah. We have one of our past mentors. He no longer does the test prep panel, but his favorite advice to give was to make your practice test environment more stressful than the testing environment would be in real life. He said that he liked to take the practice exam while his brother was distracting him. It is up to you whether or not you are going to find that helpful, but that is an approach. Basically, if you're taking the practice test in a more stressful environment than it is going to be in real life, then you're going to be much more relaxed and much more able to focus on test day. So that is totally your call. But I wanted to throw out that advice as something that I have heard before. Ultimately, I did not use, but it is up to you if you think that's going to help you or not.
I kind of forgot this about the math section. What a lot of people run into, myself included, is just making silly mistakes. So yeah, just keep your eye out for that. Make sure you read the question properly and read the entire question before you answer it. Otherwise, you are going to fall into the trap of silly mistakes, and you don't want to be losing points on stuff like that.
A really great example of how they get you with those silly mistakes. For example, they might give you a geometry question where they give you the area of a circle and they ask you to calculate the diameter, but you go and you calculate the radius instead because that's what you know how to calculate. It's not a big step to go from radius to diameter, but know that both the radius and the diameter, the correct answer for both of them is going to be an option. They really love getting people on small things like that. So if you know what you're doing, it should not be a big deal for you to, make those little changes, go through the question. If it's asking for something specific that is not immediately obvious, then with your pencil, you can't bring a highlighter, but with your pencil, make sure you underline that, rewrite it in all caps, whatever you need to do to remember to do that thing. If they give you, okay, I'm going to transition to chat for a second. Are we obliged to start studying from now? Well, we have IELTS, academic writing, and CMI to focus on. Any advice for kind of balancing all of these things at the same time?
So I say it's a smart move to do it right now, because I do think that you need all the time that you can have, especially for the SATs. It's not going to be, let's say, it's not going to be as hectic or focused right now when you're focused on other things as well. But I would say at least dedicate 30 minutes to an hour in your day to just go over SATs and actually productively revise for it and practice it under exam conditions, or practice all sorts of different questions, and maybe focus a little bit more on the things that you find more challenging, or the sections that you find more challenging. But don't leave it to last minute, because SATs is one of the exams that you kind of need to really dedicate time to study for it, and you need to do it over like a long period of time for the skills to be able to develop and have time to develop. It's not a kind of know your content in a day kind of test. It's more of because it's so time based, and you're not going to be having a lot of time on your hand to kind of think about it so much. You really need the skills to be kind of engraved in your brain and to be almost like second nature to you. So you need that kind of long period of time to be able to develop all of that in.
Adding to that, don't stress yourself out. You don't need to study a lot right now. Just make it consistent, 10, 20 minutes per day. Yeah. Go to Khan Academy, sign up for their SAT practice thing. It'll ask you if you have a specific goal as to how many minutes / how many questions you want to do per day. And then it will remind you every day, hey, you forgot to do your how many ever questions it is, and just do that every day, just a small amount of questions. That way, by the time the test rolls around, you will have done a large amount of questions. Yeah. I saw Mustafa's question in the chat. Are there specific formulas to memorize for the SAT? I think they provide you with all the formulas you need in the test booklet.
I would just say that there's different forms of the quadratic formulas that they use. So you might want to know those, because those aren't given.
I
Like
think
this point
they also-
intercept. Yes, sorry.
I think they also like you to know some basic rules about angles, like basic geometry things that you kind of just have to know. So that's not so much a formula to memorize, but something to get used to. And as you practice, those kinds of things that you need to know will become much clearer. You know, if you don't know it, you should be able to like learn that thing that and apply it within, you know, one or two practices of that concept. Yeah, I believe you all should know at that point the all the geometry and that they kind of expect you to know. But yeah. And I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you, Yusuf. So if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, all good. I was trying to remember some of the different names of the forms, but you can find them online.
Okay, so with that, I want to move into medical school a little bit because I know a lot of you are interested in medical school, and yes, there are exams related to that. Sara is, fortunately for us, very familiar with everything that goes into this. So take it away.
Okay, so it's specifically about people who would like to apply for medical school in the UK. So just to mention it out there, I'm pretty sure some of you already know about that. The difference between medical school application in the UK and the US is that medical school in the UK is mostly an undergraduate program. So whether that is medicine or dentistry, you can go into that right after your high school diploma, like after you finish your A-levels or even like the American diploma. But in the US, they treat medicine and dentistry as a postgraduate program. So you will need to have a bachelor's first. Normally that's a pre-med kind of track. And then you can apply for medical school or dentistry. So when you're applying in the UK, you will have to have some standardized tests taken. And these are two different tests that you can have either one or the other done. And that is mainly, so basically it's mainly dependent on the school or the university that you're applying to. So different schools will require different tests. So the tests are either, they're called either the BMAT or the UCAT. And I'm pretty sure we have like a very, very small section on the document for that as well. And the difference is that BMAT is a little bit more academically based. And it really covers like things like biology, chemistry, and physics. On the other hand, the UCAT is more kind of skills based, and it covers more like numerical skills and quantitative skills and stuff like that. So just as an overall, BMAT has 3 sections. The first section is going to be the more like skill-based. So it kind of talks about like reasoning and critical thinking and things like that. And these are all multiple choice questions. Section 2 is more scientific knowledge, and that is more maths, chemistry, biology, and physics. And that is also multiple choice questions. And then you have a third question or a third section where you choose one of 3 topics and write an essay about. And the whole of the knowledge that you're going to use in that essay has to come from you and things that you've read previously and so on. The UCAT is a little bit different. So the UCAT will have 5 sections overall, 4 of which go straight into the UCAT score, and that I believe is out of 3,600. So it has the verbal reasoning, which is more like fast writing and multiple choice. So it's all multiple choice in the UCAT. So the verbal reasoning is more like reading passage style, but like very short passages. They have the quantitative reasoning, and that is more maths and graphs and tables and things like that. They have the abstract reasoning, and that's more like shapes and sequences. And they have decision making, and that's more about like critical thinking and so on. They have one more section that is called situational judgment. and that is graded or scored separately. And that is more of a kind of situation, like they give you situations like role playing essentially, where they give you a situation in a medical field, in a hospital, in a dental practice, or so on, and they kind of like let you think about what you would do in that situation, or what the best practice would be in that situation. And that specific section is ranked from 1 to 4, 1 being the highest, 4 being the lowest. They say there isn't a cutoff score, but most universities are not going to accept a score lower than 3. They're basically not going to accept a 4. Some universities go as far as not accepting a 3 as well, because they really need to know that you can be trusted within a medical kind of field, with your situational judgment and so on. These are all things that you can practice in specific websites, and just like any standardized tests, and so just like the SAT and the IELTS, practice is key. And as long as you do a couple of questions, familiarize yourself with the exam, you're going to be okay.
Thank you so much for that, Sara. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go into much more depth about these exams. We just wanted to give you guys an overview of what it takes, and give you hopefully you take away that practice for standardized tests is pretty much the same. I'm going to let Sara answer the question in chat about which
Okay, so
test to take.
for me, it's basically they say, which test would you recommend to take? It's not my recommendation. I do believe that UCAT is a slightly better test in my opinion, because you don't really have to know much content for. So you don't really need to revise specific chemistry concepts, let's say, or biology concepts. But it's essentially up to the university that you're applying for, because some universities require the UCAT and some universities require the BMAT. It's not really up, like, no, I don't think there are a lot of universities that can accept both. It's really up to you to kind of figure out which ones you want to enter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I am going to say we do want to focus mostly on testing today. If you have more questions about medical school in general, SADA is accessible, and also we're going to have, during the Majors and Universities Fair, we're going to have a speaker who is specifically going to is specifically going to be answering questions about anything related to medical school, from applying and testing all the way to what it's actually like, studying it. So we're going to have, in a few weeks, hopefully, we're going to have people who can answer those questions for you. We just wanted to touch on the test a little bit. And in the same sense, there's a question in chat about choosing major in a job. Those are great questions to ask during the Majors and Universities Fair to anyone who is, speaking about a field that you're interested in, and you can also use the one-on-ones as a great space for that. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about just general test taking skills, whether it's for the SAT or for the IELTS or any other standardized test that you are going to take at some point in your lifetime, because it's kind of the same for all of them. So how do you create a study schedule to study for a standardized exam?
Personally, for me, I find that if I leave things too loosely flowing, I just tend to lose track of these kinds of things. So what I do essentially is I'd keep in mind, first of all, I'd have I'm going to practice X amount of hours per day. I'd specify an amount I want to practice per day. And then I'd put a specific time where no matter what I'm doing, I'd have to be practicing that day. I'd practice, and that's just how it would go for me. Pretty simple.
So generally for me, it's like, just like Yad said, it's a specific amount of hours. But for me, it's also a specific amount of tasks rather than hours, because I know if I put some like for me, at least if I put 2 hours for myself, I can sometimes not do as much in the 2 hours. But if I put, like, let's say I want to finish like one full test today, or I want to finish X questions, X IELTS questions, and like Y SAT questions, I will be able to kind of urge myself to finish them as fast as possible, obviously as effective as possible, and then I'll have the rest of the day for myself, and that's mainly my incentive. Put some break times in there and dedicate days or times of the day where you can go out, where you can be with family, and where you can be with friends, and where you can attend let's say like some celebrations, or some gatherings, or whatever you like to do. And don't make yourself too stressed about it, because when you're too stressed, you're not going to be as productive. It's not essentially, the program is not made to torture you, and it's not made to overly overwhelm you. It is the summer, it's still your summer vacation. So it is going to be a very productive summer, and it is a very productive summer, and you're learning so many skills, some that you haven't really thought about learning before. But it is also supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be time where you can meet other people. And as long as you kind of make time in your day to kind of have practice some of out of everything, maybe be a little bit more focused towards something when it's closer to the time of a submission or an exam. But other than that, just also make sure that you have time for yourself and your needs as well.
The way I was studying specifically for the SAT was during the week, I would dedicate a specific amount of time, try and focus on a specific section or a specific topic each day, do a certain amount of questions for that topic. And then on the weekends where I had more time on my hand, I would do 1 or 2 practice tests, depending on how I felt that weekend.
So some more advice, I guess, in that area, when deciding which sections to do. If you're tired, at least for me, what I like to do is like on the days that I'm like more overwhelmed or more tired, but I still like want to practice, I do like the easier practice that day so that at least I'm doing something. So like I would do, listening and reading on the IELTS, for example, on a day that I really didn't feel like doing anything, because you still at the end of the day are accomplishing something. You're still being productive, but in a context that's a little bit less challenging than if, say, you were taking a full practice exam that day. I also like math a lot more than I like English. So, when it came to studying for the SAT, I'm like, okay, today, I really don't want to do reading, but I have to do something. So I would do, the calculator section of math, because, having the calculator makes that section easier. So, don't always just do the easier things, because sometimes there are going to be days where you have to do the harder stuff in order to grow and to improve. But it is better to do something that's a little bit easier than to do nothing at all. So if you're debating whether or not you want to do work on a certain day for the test, just pick one of the easier sections and do it that day. Take it easy, and you're still at least making progress towards your goal. So we talk a lot about how there's kind of a time crunch on both of these exams, the SAT and the IELTS. So do you have any advice for pacing yourself in general when taking a standardized test?
On both the SAT and IELTS, you can find an average time per question, and from that you can figure out how many questions you should have completed when you're 15 minutes and half an hour in, and just use those as sort of checkpoints to say, I have to have done this many questions by this time. And even if possible, try and stay a bit ahead of that, so that if you have a challenging question that comes up, you can afford to spend a bit more time on it. But if you do get a really, really hard question, it's better to not waste lots of minutes on it when you can go through other questions and spend an appropriate amount of time on them.
Yeah, I'd say definitely number one, exactly what Yusuf just said. If you find that a question, if you start reading the question, you're going to be like, oh, this is probably going to take a while. just leave it and move on to the next one, then come back to it later, because you don't want to waste your time with it if you're not, especially if you're not going to work on it now. If you're going to end up skipping it, you might as well just skip it from the start.
Just to add on to that a little bit, specifically with the SAT, and generally more so the math section, even though it might seem like a question is super complicated, it should never take you, a ridiculous amount of time to figure out the answer to a question. So if you're looking at a question and you're taking a very long time to figure out, how to get the answer, or if you think you know how to get to the answer, but that process is taking like so many steps or is a very complicated process, you probably are overcomplicating it, because at the end of the day, these tests are designed so that in reality, you should be able to get through all of those questions in the allotted time. And it's not about whether or not you know the content, it's about whether or not you know the trick to get the answer faster. Khan Academy is a good resource for that. If you're going through a question and it seems like it's taking you forever to get the answer and the process is difficult, there probably is a trick to it. And that you can also apply that on test day. Maybe skip the question, come back to it and look at it with a fresh set of eyes, and it's easier to figure out what that trick is to get the answer faster.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, the more you practice, the faster you're going to be in general.
There's also a very, very small tip is that in the math section, as you all know, the last couple of questions, the answer to those are actually specific numbers that you basically come up with after you answer the questions, and then you write them down. And I found it easier, or a little bit more assuring, to kind of try and answer those first and then go back to all the multiple choice questions, because then if you run out of time, and hopefully you don't, but if you run out of time, you can easily just kind of circle random answers, but you can't really type in or just write down random numbers and hope for the best, basically.
Yeah, generally we don't like to endorse, guessing. But if it comes down to it, it is better to guess than to not answer at all. There is no penalty on the SAT for a wrong question. It's in the sense that, like, if you get a question wrong, they're not going to minus points. They're just going to give you 0 for that question, which is the same as not answering it at all. So you might as well risk, if you don't know the answer or you don't have time, guessing A, B, C, or D, or whatever it ends up being. Choose one, stick to it, and guess a bunch of them if you really need to, because that is more likely to get you points than not answering the question at all. So yeah, not endorsing guessing, but if it comes down to it, use it. Nasser asks in chat, is it necessary to buy those lengthy books? There are plenty of free resources. So in that sense, no, it is not necessary. There is a whole bunch of resources that you don't have to pay for in order to get very good, strong practice. Khan Academy is free. The SAT College Board website is free. The question and answer service documents, those are free and linked for you. And the same with the IELTS. I believe the British Council gives a lot of free resources as well as mini IELTS. They give lots of free resources. So if you don't want to buy the book, you don't have to. If you think it's going to be easier for you to do the work in a book, if you think that makes you more likely to do the work and do it properly, if that's what makes sense for you, then sure, go ahead, buy the book, but you shouldn't have to. And also don't be intimidated by the length. The length is probably the bulk of it being taken up by practice tests and the passages that are going to be in those practice tests. So it might look long, but it's not like they're giving you 1,000 pages of advice. They're giving you like 500 pages of practice exams. So don't be scared by seeing a really thick book that, it's just practice. Okay, we talked a lot about practice tests. What is a practice test exactly in specific? How do you take it? And how do you score it?
I think I mentioned this about the SAT, but the way I did it was to print out the College Board paper, do it in time conditions, and then fill out my answers on Khan Academy so I could get detailed feedback on each question, where I went wrong, where I went right.
I don't know if this is the same as it used to be, but I think I'm not entirely sure if it was Khan Academy or the College Board, but they had a bunch of practice tests where you could print it out and print the answer sheet and then scan the answer sheet with your phone, and then it would automatically grade it for you. The alternative is to do it manually, and yeah.
I think that was College Board, and essentially practice test is just kind of a version of the test that you're going to be taking. It's similar, it has really similar difficulty, it will have very similar conditions, very similar styles of questions, and very similar variety of different questions and different skills that it's testing. Obviously, it's not going to be exactly the same, but it is going to give you a really good idea and a really good practice for what the real deal is. How you grade it really depends on what you're taking it on. So just like Iyad mentioned, the ones that you can take from College Board, you can actually scan them by the College Board application, and they are automatically graded for you. If you're doing the digitalized version by Khan Academy or Khan Academy, it's going to be immediately graded for you by the end of it when you finish the test. And there is also the option of you grading it manually and just going one by one. Did I answer it right? Did I not answer it right? Some answer schemes will have in the back of a book, or if it's in the answer scheme itself, or the model answer or whatever it is, it's going to have things that it's the right answer is, let's say, B, and it's right because of this and this and that, and it's going to explain why it's the right answer. Similarly, it's also going to explain why each of the wrong answers are considered wrong. And that is specifically helpful in the reading and writing sections, because it's going to kind of familiarize you with the way that they're thinking and the way that they're expecting you to answer the questions, and maybe give you some tips on what to look for in an answer later on.
I think this might be worth mentioning, but essentially the curve for grading the SATs varies from test to test. Yeah, so for example, if you get X amount of right answers in each section twice, you're not necessarily going to get the same grade. I think they vary it based on how difficult the College Board thinks the test is.
Just to build on that, so when you take a practice test, basically because of that curve that Iyad mentioned, every practice test is you'd be able to make a different number of mistakes and get the same score, for example. So depending on how the College Board considers the difficulty of that test, if it's a super easy test, for example, then they would say, one mistake on math is going to translate into immediately dropping 10 or 20 points. Versus if they considered a different test to be more difficult, then you could make maybe one mistake and still get a perfect score, or you could make 3 mistakes and get the same score as if you had made 1 mistake on a different exam. So with all of that in mind, when you're taking different practice tests, your score translates between each test. So if you're getting for example, a 650 on a certain section, in this practice test, it's going to translate to the other practice test that you took. You would have gotten a 650 if you had taken that test as well, in theory. So if you're seeing an improvement in scores, it is not because of the difficulty of the practice test. It is because you are actually putting in work and actually improving. So if you're seeing an improvement, give yourself credit for that. It's not because of the difficulty of the test. You're doing a great job and you should be proud of it. One final piece of advice that I would give for practice tests is, especially for the SAT, print out the bubble sheet. It doesn't always come with the practice test, but it is the same bubble sheet for all SAT exams. You just Google SAT practice bubble sheet and you can get one and print it and take the exam using that, because on exam day, you are going to have a bubble sheet and you have to fill out that bubble sheet to get points. So it is worth it during your practice to also figure out what is a good rhythm for you to do questions and then fill out the bubble sheet in what order. So would definitely do that as you're taking the practice tests. And also I would recommend hand grading manually a few of them at least, because you kind of get to see how the grading works. It's a good way to understand like what has more weight, because they have like equations that they show you how to use in order to get to translate your answers into a grade. So I would definitely recommend, you know, manually grading at some point, because it's a good way to understand how scoring is happening.
Also, speaking of bubble sheets, this is kind of something that I don't know, sort of ran into. Essentially, yes, you do have to fill out the entire bubble properly, but if there's like a slight spot where it's a little lighter, don't waste your time trying to fill it out perfectly. It's fine.
As long as it is clear which answer is being chosen, very clear, like as long as that bubble is filled in and the rest of them are not filled in, it should be okay. It's also why it's great to have a very good pencil and a very good eraser with you. If you're making any changes on the bubble sheet, make sure that you have a good eraser to rub it out completely and then fill in the correct answer.
What I do, I think what I did was I'd highlight my answers on the test booklet, and then at the end, when I had like 5 minutes or so, I'd go to the bubble sheet and then bubble them in, just so that those are my final answers and I don't have to erase and rewrite again.
However, at the same time, if you are expecting a time crunch, do not leave the bubbling until the end. If you think that you're going to need the full time to answer the questions, don't leave bubbling until the end and risk not having any answers at all. So it's kind of a balance, trying to figure out what's going to work best for you. But you know, to keep that in mind, that you want to have at least some answer that you submit.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked about improving scores between tests. Okay. We talk a lot about practicing. We said the word practice so many times in this Zoom. What happens when you get bored of practicing?
You can take a break, but then you're gonna have to start practicing a bit more. There's no escaping the practicing. There aren't many other ways to study for standardized tests like these.
Yeah, it's a cruel reality. It's something that you essentially need to do. But just like Yusuf said, just give yourself a break for a bit. Maybe try and practice something else rather than what you've been practicing for a while. But other than that, it's just you have to keep fighting through it.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with taking some time to do something you enjoy, or like taking a day off, you feel sick of studying, and then getting right back at it the next day.
As much as we say practice, at the end of the day, your health and your ability to, you know, live life outside of an exam is so much more important. So please put yourselves first. You know, if you think you need a break, take a break. You know, the score on the exam is not as important as your ability to be alive and be healthy. So as much as we have been saying practice and fight through it, please always put yourselves first as well at the same time. And sometimes putting yourself first means practicing, and sometimes putting yourself first means taking a break. So, you know, be mindful of that and give yourself the space that you need sometimes to step away. Yeah. Okay. What about test fatigue on test day? It's a very long exam. The SAT is like 3 hours, and I forget how long the IELTS is. So you're going to get tired at some point throughout. So what advice do you guys have for powering through and getting through test day?
Stay hydrated, and yeah, I guess, yeah, get snacks as well with you for the exam. We listed a list of we had a list of things you should bring to your test in the document Fatima sent, and two of them are bringing water and snacks, just so you could make sure you're feeling fresh, you're not dehydrated, or yeah, you're not feeling hungry or anything like that.
Try and have breakfast if your exam, which is most probably going to be in the morning, but try have breakfast before your exam. Don't have something too heavy, but just have something to give you enough energy. If you're a coffee person, so don't experiment on the day of the exam, but if you're a coffee person, have a cup of coffee in the morning and be able to have that power through you. There's also that if you just suddenly feel really, really tired, or if your eyes start to hurt or feel fatigued during the exam, there is no problem of having a couple of seconds, just leaving everything and maybe staring into like the wall in front of you or something for a bit, or just closing your eyes for a minute. Don't take too much time, but also don't just go on powering through it, because if you're too tired or if your eyes are too tired, you're not going to be able to as effectively finish the exam. So if you think that you need a couple of seconds to kind of recollect yourself and have some deep breaths, or just kind of close your eyes for a bit, then give yourself that.
Also, they generally build breaks into the test time. And they will only give you a break after you should have been done with a section. So during the break, don't waste any brain energy trying to think about what you should have done right or wrong. At that point, that section is over. Don't beat yourself up over something that you think you did right or wrong. Try to relax, try to remove yourself from the test for a little bit so that when you come back to the next section, you are fresher. Okay. And finally, this question's a little bit more difficult. I hope you guys bear with me. But did you ever feel, throughout the program as you're studying for exams, did you feel like you were comparing yourself to other candidates, or that you were not doing enough or falling behind or not scoring high enough, all of that kind of that sinking feeling that you are not doing what you need to be doing? Did you experience that, and how did you deal with it?
I think it's absolutely very easy to start comparing yourself to other candidates. Oh, they're getting higher scores on me than on their practice test. They're gonna do better than me on the real test. And that can cause a lot of anxiety. But you have to understand that different people practice differently. And just because right now they're getting higher scores than you doesn't mean that you can put in the work and get it eventually and do just as good, if not better. It's not worth it to compare yourself, because everyone's experiences are different. The way everyone revises is different. So you shouldn't really be comparing yourselves. But I do understand the urge is obviously there. This is a big deal to everyone here. So just try and be mindful that everyone is different and will prepare differently.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it. Sorry.
I absolutely agree with Yusuf. There is no point in you comparing yourself to your friends. You're not going to get better because of it. You're just going to stress yourself out. Yeah, I just aim for the best you could do. So essentially, if you're doing the SATs, aim for the 1600. If you're doing the IELTS, aim for the 9. You might not get the 9, but just try your best. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Just try your best, focus on yourself, do whatever you can to get the highest score possible, and then whatever happens. Comparing yourself to others will not help you.
So essentially, as cliche as this is, the only person you should be comparing yourself to is you, and you should only be comparing your today's test results to yesterday's test results to the day before's test results and so on. And you shouldn't be really thinking about other people's performance, because you really don't know if that performance is consistent or so on. You really need to kind of focus all the energy of making your performance consistent and your performance better. And essentially, just when you think about it, you were all chosen in the same program. Program is highly competitive, and that means all of you are really, really similar in levels to each other. So it's really rare when one of you is way better than someone else or the rest of you guys, or if one of you is doing extremely better than the rest of you. You guys are all brilliant, and you are doing great things to be in that program, and to have the chance that you are having right now. So just focus on making yourself better, and that's the best that you can do. And just know that as long as you're doing your best, then that's all you should require from yourself.
I have a bit of a story to share, and I hope you guys take something away from it that helps you. So when I was in the mess of, studying for and taking the SAT, at that point, my closest friend throughout high school had already taken the exam the previous December, and she had taken it once, and she was so beyond happy with her score. And when I found out her score, I felt like, oh my God, I'm never going to beat that. And as I was doing my practice exams, I was so unhappy with my score because compared to her, I was not, I was nowhere even close to what she had gotten. And it was very discouraging for me. I kept taking practice tests and I kept getting the same score, like not improving too much, and constantly comparing myself to her. And it was very not helpful. I started dreading, studying. I started not wanting to be in that environment, and I didn't want to think about the SAT at all. And it was very discouraging for me. But the advice that my parents had given me was focus on what you can control. What can I control in this situation? My practice. Me, I don't know what she had done to get to that score. I don't know how much practice and how much time she had put in. So I couldn't ever properly and accurately compare myself to her. And it's kind of a lost cause comparing your score to other people, because you don't know what's working for them. You only know what's working for you, and that's what you should focus on. So I, again, focused on what I could control. I went back to practicing, and I started thinking more about what I was doing rather than what she maybe had done. And it got me so much further. I ended up improving my score so much. I actually beat her. So it's not about winning, but it's about when I focused on myself and on what I was doing, I ended up achieving my goal, which was not so much to do better than her, but to get a score that I was happy with, right? And basically what I hope you take away from this is that it's your work that is going to matter for you. What, my friend was doing was not going to make my score better, but what I was doing was going to make my score better. So as you're practicing and as you're studying for these exams, please focus on that and focus on what you can do, because that's going to get you so much further than thinking about other people. Okay, I know that was a little bit tough to think about. Okay, let's talk about test day a little bit. We already gave you some advice on what you should bring to the test room, in addition to, snacks and water and maybe something to drink to give you energy. Make sure you bring a sweatshirt. Sometimes the testing rooms are really cold, even though it's August. In Bahrain, it is so cold in that test room. It's like, I wish it was this cold outside, but it's not. So bring a sweatshirt. Or something to keep you warm if you need it. Wear layers so that if it's hot, you can just take it off. When I'm stressed about something, I tend to, my body temperature tends to rise and I start to feel warm. So, even though the room is freezing, you might be anxious about the exam. So you want to be able to also take off that layer. And make sure you bring very good pencils and a very good eraser. And a calculator for the SAT that is approved. In the document, we have a list of all the approved calculators and how you can figure out if the one that you have is approved, but you are going to want a calculator. Some people say to bring a backup calculator as well. I think that's a little bit extreme, but if you are able to, it's not a bad idea. You know, in case your calculator happens to die on you. And also keep in mind that if you forget your calculator, it's not the end of the world. Every question on the calculator section of the math SAT, you don't absolutely need a calculator for in order to get the answer. So if you happen to forget it, you can still get the answers to those questions without a calculator. It would just make it a little bit easier. So do not freak out. But at the same time, you know, you should probably bring it if you can. And then they don't let you have a watch in the IELTS testing room, but in the SAT room, they let you have a watch that's not a smartwatch. So an analog or digital, as long as it doesn't have internet capabilities, and as long as it doesn't have a calculator screen, you can bring us a watch. It's a good idea to do so because you never know if the clock is going to be in view or not, and you want to be able to see the time in order to pace yourself. So yeah. You guys have any advice for testing day aside from what to bring?
Honestly, nothing more than what you've said. You've covered it really well.
Yeah, just, I don't know, relax before the test. Try not to sweat it. Yeah, that's it.
And don't do practice the day of the exam. It might seem like a good idea to bring bring practice questions with you and go over them in the car on your way to the exam. Don't do that. It's just going to stress you out more. At that point, you have done everything that you need to do, you know, in the time leading up. So on the day of the exam, breathe, pray, and hope that Allah takes care of everything. And, you know, when you get to the exam, that's when you start the work. Don't stress yourselves out and don't overextend yourselves in the time before the test, because you're going to need all of that energy. You know, you're going to need all of that energy for the test itself. Okay, I have reached the end of the questions that I had for the panelists. Now would be a great time to ask any other questions that you guys have relating to standardized testing, the SAT and the IELTS. If you have any general questions about the UCAT or the BMAT, you know, we'll try our best to make sure that you have answers to those. But this time is yours to ask any questions that you have. Yeah. Okay, we have a question in chat. So similar to the SAT reading, for IELTS reading, do you recommend skimming the entire passage or just the first 2 sentences of each paragraph?
I would say just skim the first couple of sentences, or just like Fatma said, the first and last sentences of each paragraph, because essentially you are going to go over it again and read it kind of in detail when you hit a question that needs you to read a specific paragraph. But if you spend so much time reading the entire thing all over, you're going to be forgetting, or like you're going to forget what's exactly in there by the time you reach the questions or the specific questions that needs to the content. And as we said, the questions kind of go in order. So you're going to be answering questions about paragraph 2, let's say, and then paragraph 3, and then paragraph 4. And then when you reach these questions, you are going to be individually reading paragraph 2 and then paragraph 3. So it is useless to kind of read them all in the beginning and then go read them again after you face a question.
Okay. Our next question, can we summarize? Okay, so just a quick summary of everything that we've said so far. Practice, practice, practice. Practice is your best friend for the IELTS, for the SAT, and for any other standardized test. I know at this point that we've said it so many times, but that really is what's going to get you the furthest, is getting as much practice as you can. And aside from that, I think the most important piece of advice, and my fellow panelists can argue with me about this if you would like, if you disagree, but I think aside from practicing, focusing on what you can do and not what other people are doing. Comparing yourself is not going to get you as far as you want it to. It really isn't. It's really more so about what you can do, and the time that you're spending, because again, you really never know what is working for other people and what isn't. What's most important is what is working for you. So that would be, if I were you, my two biggest takeaways from this panel. If anyone else has anything to add to that.
I think those are definitely the top two.
All right, our next question, will we have a recording of this panel? Yes, this panel is being recorded. Once we are done, it'll be sent out to you all via email shortly, so that you can watch it over if you would like. SAT reading, how would you suggest to stay focused on some of the intricate texts that are arguably boring or difficult to understand?
Well, it becomes easier under test conditions when you have the adrenaline rushing through you. You kind of, your mind gets stuck to the test. So in the test conditions, you don't need to worry, but when you're practicing, it can get a bit tedious, boring, repetitive. So you just need to remember that it's just these 4 or 3 in the IELTS short passages, and you can read each of them in just a couple of minutes. It shouldn't take you too much time. So just try and get through it. If you're really too bored or finding it too tedious, then take a break. No one's forcing you to do it at that exact moment.
Yeah, I was gonna say, essentially, I run into that issue quite a bit where I get bogged down by the text or have trouble understanding it. What I do is just try to get the general gist of it, skim it really quickly, and if you feel like it's gonna take too long to actually understand, just move on and then try to come back to it. You'll probably get something close to the answer or something like that, but yeah, you don't have to fully understand it.
Yeah, especially with you know, like what we were talking about with skimming. If you're reading it and you're spending that much time trying to understand what it's saying, and you don't even know if there's going to be a question about that specifically, that's also going to be a little bit of a waste of your time and your energy. So it is best to skim, and that kind of helps you avoid getting bogged down in the text and what it means and all of that, and only focusing on that when it's actually important to answer a question. And you'll find that you're much more interested in the text and what it means when you actually have to answer a question about it. So that'll help a little bit as well. Yeah, okay. So for the SAT writing, is skimming still helpful? No, because in the SAT writing section, the questions are embedded within the text. And you can't really skim, and the rest of the text isn't really important to your answer to a specific question. The writing section is a lot more about making corrections to the syntax and the grammar of a particular sentence or a particular word that's being used in the text. So yeah, I don't skim, don't even, honestly, there's not a whole lot of text between the 2 questions, like between 2 questions in a passage. So I would say just like read it as you go and answer as you go. And as you look at a practice writing section, I think you'll know what I mean. It's very easy to just go through and answer the questions as you go without having to worry about skimming or worry about meaning or anything like that. You're allowed to have
This
scratch.
might be-
Go ahead. Sorry.
This might just be because of the difficulty of the questions, but essentially I found the writing text a lot more bearable than the reading text. But that might just be because of the questions, but that was my experience.
So essentially, you don't really need to read it first and then go to the questions. You should just go to the questions and then read it as you answer, because they basically are going to pinpoint where they want you to look and where they want you to answer.
They quite literally underline the part of the text that's going to have a question with it and tell you the number. You know, this question is going to be about this particular part, and it's always in order. So you really truly can just answer as you go without having to worry about, like, you would never have to read a writing section twice, ever. You can just go through it once, and as long as you answer that question, that's what matters. Okay, scratch paper during the SAT math section. you aren't given any, and you really can't bring any, but you shouldn't need it. There is enough space in the test book for you to kind of like do a little bit of the whatever small calculations you need to make within the booklet itself. So while you cannot bring scratch paper, it's okay because you don't need it anyway. Do we want to talk about how we came up with the who tweeted it?
Sure, why not? Yeah, we were discussing an idea for the icebreaker. Initially, the idea was to bring, you know, random movie quotes and then have you guys guess which movie is from. Then later on, we realized, hey, this might be difficult because, like, you know, usually with these things, I can't, like, it's only the small group of movies that you've watched that you can guess where that quote came from. So then Fatma suggested we do tweets, and yeah, I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Given that you guys immediately knew that Elon was going to be on there at some point tweeting something crazy, that was exactly what we were going for. We thought you guys would be able to guess at least a little bit which of our ridiculous celebrities was saying what. Okay, Sara, I'm going to let you take the UCAT question.
So I don't really have an answer to that, where you can take it in Bahrain, but I'm pretty sure there are some test centers in Bahrain. When I took the UCAT, it was in the midst of COVID, so test centers were essentially closed, and I had to take it online at home, where I had to have like a camera pointed at me, and I had to like take a video of everything that's surrounding me and the whole of the walls and the floor, and it was a process. But then I'm pretty sure they are starting to open test centers now, and I think you might be able to have more answers on the website itself, on the UCAT website. And I'll just put a link on there, but just give me a second.
I would assume that you can probably take it at the British Council, but I would double check that. But usually
Yeah.
that's what would take UK tests.
So they just have their website here, and I'm pretty sure that you can find what test centers are available in Bahrain.
Thank you so much, Sara. Do you guys have any other questions? We are coming up on what we said would be the end of our time, but if you have any questions, I can stay and help answer them, and it's up to the rest of the panelists if you would like to stay as well.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions coming up, oh wait, I think there might be one. But just in the meantime, I'm pretty sure it's the same with everyone. You do have our contact details, especially through the mentoring program booklet. I'm pretty sure you have access to our emails, especially. We want you to know that we're all accessible, and we're all here to help as mentors and as people who went through the same experience, and just want to be there for the support. You can just email us anytime you want with any question that you have, and we can answer you as best as we can, or point you to someone who can answer you even better than we can.
All right. I'm gonna stay on just to make sure that any questions are answered, but you guys, no one is obliged to stay at this point.
Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, I hope you guys found this beneficial. Yeah, reach out if you have any questions. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah.
Thank you guys, and good luck with everything that you're going through at the moment.
Thank you so much. This is my first panel, so I'm glad I could have helped out with people who I was in the position of last year.
And hopefully many of us, or hopefully at least I will see many of you at the college applications workshop. I believe Yusuf is going to be there as well. So yeah, come to the workshop, come to the Majors and Universities Fair. We hope that anything and everything that we are offering to you guys is actually helpful to you all. Yeah.
Alrighty, I'm heading out. Bye.
Bye. All right, if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Otherwise I am going to end the meeting. Okay.